Okay, welcome back. We're now into part 2 of emotional intelligence, and we're going to pick up where we left off. And I think I said I was going to start off with the neurobiological basis for emotional intelligence. And we're also going to touch on a brief review on something that's not in your textbook, but it's a newer area of happiness intelligence. So let's get right into it. So, neurobiological basis for emotional intelligence. So we're going to look at the brain circuits. Brain circuits involving the prefrontal cortex, the amygdala, and the insula and cingulate cortex subserve emotional intelligence. Now, we're going to look at what these different parts do. Now, there's a sort of what we'll call the thinking center of the brain, and this is the prefrontal cortex, and it promotes the formation of regulation and management of emotional intelligence skills. So there's the subserve is regulation and management. In emotional center of the brain, well, this is where the amygdala is associated with emotional reactions. Now, you should know the amygdala is a very old portion of the brain, and it's likely one of the first developed elements of the brain. So a lot of the fright and fight and the emotional substance is living or is sourced out of the amygdala. And then the EI bridge, or the emotional intelligence bridge. This is the insula and the cingulate integrate emotional and the cognitive process. It's the link between these two elements. Now, neuroefficiency is in order to have or gain neuroefficiency, the higher emotional intelligence is associated with greater neuroefficiency. It's indicated by less activity in the prefrontal cortex when solving emotional problems, similar to the greater neural efficiency found in people with higher IQs when they're solving cognitive problems. And so it would appear for them to be as easy as somebody with high EQ. So the same brain circuits and patterns of neural efficiency are associated with trait and ability emotional intelligence. Now, in your text, there's a section labeled Questions and Answers about Emotional Intelligence. I'd really encourage you to read the first paragraph in particular as it outlines correlational statistics, and more specifically, how to understand the correlational numbers +1 to -1. Now, they can give you a better grasp of the correlational response to the question in order to see whether there is an association of strength or weakness. Okay? Now, we're going to next look at some means or ways to enhance emotional intelligence through school programs for children and adolescents, also in the workplace experiences. And then we're going to lastly sort of look at what we can do to enhance our own emotional intelligence. Now, it's important to note that when we are developing our own emotional intelligence, all of this is important for us to take as seriously as we can, because it's asking us to be very self-reflective and self-aware in order to make growth steps towards greater emotional intelligence. So, to determine the effectiveness of emotional intelligence training in school, meta-analysis by Joseph Durlach. Now remember, meta-analysis is looking at a variety of other pieces of research and combining their results and seeing the results of that. Now, Joseph Durlach showed that school-based social emotional learning, SEL programs, he found 3 sort of results, and they're kind of interesting in a way, because on the one hand, he found that these SEL programs had medium effect on social and emotional skills. These programs also had a small effect on pro-social behavior and performance. But this is the interesting third piece, is that through these programs, these students continue to have positive effect 18 years after these interventions. So that tells us a little bit about, one, emotional intelligence is effective and can be taught, and also that it can be practiced and we can continue to be stronger at emotional intelligence. So better outcomes occur in programs that had very specific learning goals. Now that's an important element to positive psychology, because having clear goals is what brings meaning to life. Secondly, it uses a step-by-step training approach. Again, with positive psychology, step-by-step is really just like following the steps of a goal to achieve. Thirdly, we're implemented as program designers intended. Now, what that means is these programs, like SEL, would be delivered exactly as they were intended. That could mean that you make statements consistently about what things are being done, instructions being given clearly and consistently, and that's what the program designers intended, and that can really help the effectiveness of programs. Now, an example of a school-based training program is one that was developed by Mark Brackett. It's called Ruler. Now, Ruler, R-U-L-E-R, was developed by Mark at Yale University, and it's an example of emotional intelligence training in schools. Now, Ruler is an acronym, and it's an acronym for 5 key emotional skills which the program facilitates in teachers, children, and adolescents. They first recognize emotions of self and others. They secondly understand the cause and consequences of emotions. Thirdly, they begin by labeling emotions accurately. 4, expressing emotions appropriately. And then 5, regulating emotions effectively. Now, that's a summation, really, of what is emotional intelligence. Getting a handle on our own perspective emotionally and on the perspective of others, as well as being able to make appropriate selections about what's the response, and to be able to regulate those effects and reflect back to see what we learned. So, 4 key interventions in this Ruler program. So in the schools, the school works together towards these key interventions. The first is to create a charter. Now, you might not be familiar, but a charter is an aspirational statement that everyone signs. Now, this is something that all members of the school will contribute to by addressing 2 key questions as a school. How do we want to feel? And how do we ensure that everyone has these feelings? Now, essentially, the school is creating, and everyone is agreeing to, school norms. These are the sort of general behaviors of accepted behavior that is valued and is rewarded. Okay, the second stage is what's known as a mood meter, giving kids or teens a way of naming emotions. So they develop a 4-quadrant grid for naming emotions. Teachers and children come to a consensus on feeling words and distinctions between them. Is a 4-quadrant grid for naming emotions, and they have these 4. There's a color, high-low energy, high-low pleasantness. So, for example, one of the quadrants would be positive high-energy emotions, which are yellow. Think happy. Positive low-energy emotions, think green. And this would be an example of being just relaxed. Negative high-energy emotions, think red, angry, or frightened. And negative low energy emotions are blue, sad. And this is a way of helping everybody come to a very broad but general understanding of emotional diversity and being able to identify them and be able to own them. 3. 3. Meta moments. Now, this is a 4-step strategy for regulating emotions in difficult situations. First thing you do, sense the emotion by noticing shifts in cognition, physiology, and behavior. Cognition is thinking. So what are you thinking while you experience these difficult situations, and what emotions are you having? Physiology is how our physical body feels while we're having this difficult situation. And then, of course, behavior would be what was the physical action that we took to either address it. The second element in this would be pause and breathe. Now, this can be a variety of things, but the whole point is don't decide immediately. Pause, stop, and breathe. 3, set your best self in your mind's eye. So basically what you're trying to do once you've paused and start breathing is start to get yourself to visualize. What is it that you would like to see yourself be in your own eye about handling this situation? And then the last step would be strategize and act. Choose and use a helpful emotional regulation strategy before acting. This isn't all going to change emotional intelligence quickly. This is a process. And that may be why some of the results lasted for 18 years. The fourth component of this, what the school is doing, is a blueprint. And that's a strategy for managing conflict and restoring a positive climate by both people asking themselves, how do you feel? What caused my feelings? How did I express and regulate my feelings? Then begin to inquire, how do you feel? What caused your feelings? And regulate their feelings. By answering these questions, brings self-awareness and empathy. Then you can ask 2 more questions. What could I have done to handle the situation better? And what can I do now? Now, Ruler is a systematic process. Includes training for staff, options to include in curriculum, school policies, and family support. Okay, now that's essential. That gives you a sample of what it could look like in a school. Now let's consider enhancing emotional intelligence in the workplace. And this is done quite a bit in the workplace, actually. Meta-analysis, again, about studying studies, has shown that emotional intelligence training can lead to increases in emotional intelligence post-treatment and at follow-up for frontline employees and managers in a range of industries. This could include retail, where you're dealing with the public on a face-to-face basis, banking, where you're dealing with the public plus the economic world, law enforcement, teaching, healthcare, all can benefit from EI training. Some of what was uncovered from the meta-analysis are as follows, and I won't go through the entire list. Now, what they developed was a consortium for research on emotional intelligence in organizations where they provided guidelines for promoting best practices, EI training, and strategies in the workplace. Now, I'm only highlighting a few. Organizational needs assessment is what's often done, where they assess the organization's needs by determining emotional intelligence competencies essential for a effective job performance. Perceiving, understanding, using, and managing emotions. They will do an assessment of how the organization is using that. Individual assessments and feedback. This is another strategy that's been employed in workplaces. They conduct individual assessments and give feedback to staff on their EI competencies they need to develop to improve on job performances and in a supportive environment. So they'll try to help employees, they may have them do some of the surveys that are done in positive psychology to get data to help them give feedback as to how they're doing and how they're growing. Now, they can, if they need to, move to what would be a goal setting and training program, where they invite staff to set all their own goals and participate in EI training and link training goals to staff's personal values and increase their motivation. Now, this can all be done very effectively. Positive relationships are also important. Fostering a positive relationship between trainers and staff and among staff groups so that they can support each other throughout the training. And there are many others, and we'll look at, I would encourage you to look at these so you can see for yourself the variety that are there. Okay, now lastly here, I think I would like us to look at enhancing our own emotional intelligence. Now, this is where I'm going to remind you again that this is why, when we get into this content, try to get yourself thinking in regards to, if I was to do this on my own, what would, how will I be using this? Because this is something you need to be very introspective and self-aware. And so you should dedicate some time, not the whole day, a chunk of time that you will do something like this for yourself. So we're going to look at 2 strategies. There are lots, and there are many even in your text, but I'm going to look at 2. I'll describe 2 strategies, so check box 5.4, strategies for enhancing emotional intelligence. All right, the first step, pause, or not the first step, but the first one we're going to look at is pause and practice emotional intelligence by setting emotional goals. Now, that's a really good beginning part. You answer these questions. In doing so, you consider your life inclusive with your family, your friends, your education experience, and your work situation. So when you think in terms of myself, my world, those things get included. Okay? And then you ask these sorts of questions. How do you want to feel? How do you want others to feel? What are the main things you will do to achieve these emotional goals? Now, as a strategy, this is one you would spend time allowing yourself to explore within yourself, where you have moments of being candid with yourself. You yourself know when, what you want to feel, how others ought to feel when they're around you. You want them to feel safe and secure. And so these emotional goals then allow you to apply goal-setting strategies, and you can work towards this. Now, the second strategy I want to look at, and it's, again, a lot of the work in emotional intelligence is very, like I said, introspective. You've got to be prepared to look deep inside and be prepared to recognize that not everything is perfect and not everything is the way it ought to be or the way you might want it to be. So then it's about making changes to grow emotional intelligence. So let's look at the second strategy, and it's basically a mood change diary. Now, there's lots of ways to do this, and I'll introduce one that you could consider. For each episode in your journal, you could look at it as this is loosely an ABC log, an A, a B, and a C. The A is the activity that led to the change in the mood. Now, in an ABC log, A is antecedent, which is what is the activity that led to the change in mood. Now, in an ABC log, the B is the behavior. What did you witness? What is the mood change? But in this particular one, it's the beliefs that led to the change in mood. You had an antecedent activity that led to the mood, then you had a belief that led to the change in mood, and then C is the consequent mood change. What was the result? Now, you may also find it's useful to use a rate mood changes. So a 10-point scale for intensity, from 1 equaling low intensity and 10 equaling high intensity. And add a 10-point scale for pleasantness, from 1 being very unpleasant to 10 being very pleasant. And then there's the times when you start to name the emotion. Here are some examples. If you're dealing with high-intensity positive emotions, you could be looking at labels like excited, happy, optimistic, motivated. Low-intensity positive emotions, you would have things like relaxed, content, grateful, loving. High-intensity negative emotions, angry, stressed, frightened, shocked. Low-intensity negative emotions, depressed, sad, pessimistic, lonely. Worthy to note that because it says depressed, that's not clinical depression. That's just extended sadness, but not extended enough to be depression clinically, but to be sad for an extended period of time. Now, once you've got some labels, then you identify the emotion by noticing changes in how you feel. That if you've labeled the emotion, does that change something? What are you thinking? What is your behavior? It's important to note that emotions involve all three. Emotions involve our thinking. As we approach something that we're nervous or anxious about, we start thinking about our nervousness and our anxiousness. The physiological shifts, our heart rate might increase, our breathing might shorten, we might start to perspire. And then what do we do behaviorally? What is the action we took? Did I walk away and avoid the situation? Did I approach the situation? And you collect data. You can then look for patterns in the A, patterns in the B, and patterns in the C to see what might those patterns or trends communicate about your emotions and what you understand. Now, I've mentioned already pause and take, pause and break. Now, pause and taking 3 deep breaths, breathing in for 3 seconds and letting out for 6. Now, there are a variety of things. I prefer what I know as 5-5-5. This is where you inhale slowly for the count of 5. Then you hold for the count of 5. And then you breathe out to the count of 5. And you do that 5 times. 1, while you're counting and doing the breathing, what's been bugging you, you can't think about because you're thinking about counting and holding your breath and letting your breath out. And by doing that breathing, you're oxygenating your blood, which is making your brain get more oxygen, which allows it to be more considered, allows it to work better. All right? So bring to mind an image of your best self, the person you really want to be. You visualize that person. You make it colorful. You make it dynamic. Where are you? What's around you? Who's there? What do you smell? What do you see? What do you feel? Make it dynamic. Then choose and use a helpful strategy for managing your emotions before impulsively acting on your negative emotions. Now that takes practice, but to take a moment to stop and breathe and think more clearly will enable you to make a better emotional decision without using impulsivity. Here are some examples. Breathing deeply for 3 and out for 6, or in the 5-5-5, allows yourself to fully experience and to tolerate the distress caused by difficult emotions that you're experiencing. Noticing that as you do so, they become less intense. Now, what I mean by that is as you breathe rhythmically and take some time, they become, the emotions, less intense. Then, think of a more positive way, or even a humorous way, of viewing the situation. You could even distract yourself by doing something else. Leave or take a time out from a difficult situation. Get support from a friend. These are all important elements to help you give yourself time to make a better emotional choice, which is what emotional intelligence is largely about. Okay, the next, you would clarify how you felt during this conflict by answering these questions. How did I feel doing that? Do I know better what caused my feelings? And how did I express and regulate my feelings? Then you clarify how you think the other person felt during the conflict by answering these questions. How did the other person feel? What caused their feelings, and how did they express and regulate their feelings? I hope you're picking up here that emotional intelligence isn't about just managing yours, but it's being more aware of the other people and their emotions and how yours and theirs connect and relate to one another. Then next, what we do is we reflect on what we have learned and make a plan by answering these questions. What could I have done to handle the situation better? And what can I do now? There are a lot of emotional intelligence strategies. These are just a couple that I've highlighted. There are more in your textbook, but please take a moment to help yourself be strong at emotional intelligence. All right, now the last little bit I would like to include is happiness intelligence. Now that doesn't seem to make sense. Happy and intelligent. Sometimes the things I'm happy about aren't that intelligent. At any rate, happiness intelligence is about having accurate knowledge about happiness and being able to use the knowledge effectively in our own lives. To illustrate, people in high in happiness intelligence accurately understand the things that make them happy over the long run. People in low happiness intelligence might believe that if they get a new house or move to a new city or get a new job or even a new partner, that they would finally be happy. Those in high happiness intelligence, on the other hand, would recognize that getting a higher paying job might not make them happier if it takes them away from the relationships and leisure life. So what are the important components of happiness intelligence? Well, the answer to that question would likely be in our book itself. But I propose that, accurate, effective forecasting is the key to happiness intelligence. Accurate happiness forecasting matters to our happiness. Now, you should have heard that before because we covered that in Chapter 1, where we explored several effective forecasting errors that could bear on our happiness. People in high happiness intelligence should and do usually comprehend these errors and are able to avoid them. So let's look at a few of these forecasting errors from Chapter 1. For instance, with impact bias. Now, I know that I tend to overestimate an intensity and duration of my emotional responses to events. Sometimes people avoid things that might be potentially good in their lives because they overestimate how terrible it would feel if things don't come out the way they had hoped. At times, we refrain from doing good things that might have a negative consequence because of immune neglect. We underestimate how effective our psychological immune system is at handling a number of adverse circumstances. Sometimes we make decisions that are not conducive to our happiness because of the focusing illusion. We focus on one salient aspect of a choice and make it our decision based on that one feature, ignoring all other characteristics of the choice. So those in low happiness will move to California because, well, they know the sunny weather will make them happy. But in the process, they forgot to consider the crowds, how expensive it is to live there, and that they are moving away from friends and family. Now, sometimes we buy something that is, more than we can afford because we assume how much we wanted that thing is reflective of how much we will like that thing. This is the want for like confusion. And unless we are aware of this effective forecasting error, it might be damaging to our happiness. There are several other happiness forecasting errors. However, the point is, people in high happiness intelligence often grasp these natural tendencies in human thinking and avoid these mistakes. And that should bode well for their happiness. So just to finish up on the effective forecasting errors that might be more essential to your happiness, social neglect. Now, research demonstrates that we tend to neglect just how much social interactions, even with strangers, are important to our happiness. In short, people who are high in happiness comprehend that other people matter. And we can probably agree that happiness can matter a lot to us. So this brings us to the end to emotional intelligence. And I hope you've gotten a better idea of exactly what it is, but also aware that it's not a very easy surface skill to manage. We have to dig in deeper. We need to be introspective and self-aware. Well, I really hope you gain something from this chapter. Next week, we're going to start looking at the positive self. So we'll see you next week. Good luck, everybody. Bye.